access the phone.
One of the demands that are being made is that Julian, for example, should be allowed into home detention. Is that happening with any prisoner? I mean, are people being released where it's possible to release them?
They are, but it's a slow process because of the criteria that is being placed upon those prisoners getting that executive release. So,
okay, hold on.
Only go out if absolutely necessary. That means for groceries, for medications, for medical appointments, or if you provide an essential service. Protect yourself and others. Stay home. For information, visit ontario.ca/coronavirus. Paid for by the Government of Ontario. This is All News Radio, 680 News.
A few clouds and 5 degrees in downtown Toronto. Good evening. From the 680 News Broadcast Center, I'm Nyneteen. Here are the top stories this hour. An RCMP officer is among the multiple people killed last night in Nova Scotia, now the biggest mass shooting in Canadian history. Officials say at least 17 people were killed, but don't know the exact number because there were multiple locations involved. Those numbers could still rise by early morning tomorrow. For at least a portion of the rampage, officials say 51-year-old Gabriel Wortman was wearing an RCMP uniform and driving in a mock cruiser. The investigation is still ongoing. Stay with 680 for the latest on this developed story. 680 News Time, 10:15. Now 680 Sports and Sportsnet, 590 The Fan. Here's Colin Teskey.
Golf courses in select places have been reopened, and many think that golf could be the first pro sport to resume play. But Sportsnet golf analyst Ian Leggett weighs in on whether the PGA could resume as early as June.
I don't know if you can be 100% safe. I think that we can, make an attempt at it. It's going to be very, very difficult to run a PGA Tour event. And again, this week, even the PGA Tour has said that they don't have a complete logistics around it.
This year's Canadian Open is canceled and was set to take place at St. George's here in Toronto. And the NFL Draft is set to take place this week. The Cincinnati Bengals are on the clock with the first overall pick, and the Bengals are expected to take Ohio native and LSU quarterback Joe Burrow, who led the Tigers to a national championship victory over Clemson. Sports at 15 and 45 past every hour or anytime at sportsnet.ca/590.
680 News Time, 10:16.
We'll get you home with the best local traffic reports on the ones on 680 News.
Are you a condo landlord and your tenant has informed you they cannot make April rent or ask to negotiate a reduced rent? With the COVID-19 crisis, you can no longer evict a tenant for non-payment of rent. Register for our upcoming webinar at remaxwealth.com featuring Elaine Page, past Ontario Law Society Paralegal of the Year, to learn how to protect yourself as a landlord. Again, that is remaxwealth.com to register.
Did you know Ontario has the safest roads in North America? Increased awareness to prevent impaired driving, like calling home, taking a cab, or having a designated driver are some of the reasons. Responsible legislation and well-researched policies and programs for serving and selling alcohol all add up to saving lives and preventing injuries. A message from Arrive Alive, Drive Sober, and Smart Serve Ontario. Visit arrivealive.org to find out more. Thanks for driving sober.
You're listening to All News Radio 680 News. Residents in a rural Nova Scotia
Just remember, I have a Smart Serve card. It don't ever expire, and I got it on the internet.
Authorities say they were called to a Portage Pig home yesterday, where they found multiple people down inside and outside of the residence.
Multiple people down. Oh, you're using the lingo. Were they running
shooting, including Constable Heidi Stevens and another officers received treatment for non-life-threatening injuries.
Cold, purple, or some
shit. Says they can't confirm how many people were killed exactly because there were multiple locations involved.
We are in the early stages of an incredibly detailed and complex investigation that has forever changed countless lives and has left multiple victims.
It didn't change countless lives. It ended
by the province's police watchdog, who say they're not treating it as a terror attack. The suspect, 51-year-old Gabriel Wortman, is dead, though there's no information on how he died.
If I block a pipeline on my land, I'm a terrorist. You understand? Eco-terrorist. I'm an Indian, but I'm an eco-terrorist, right? It's my land I'm trying to protect, but I'm an ecological terrorist. But this is not terrorism. It may well be white supremacism, anti-government, but it is terrorism, no matter how you cut it. If I shoot up 13 people, bro, you better call it terrorism or I'm gonna come get you.
While people say it's too early to tell what his motivation was,
CNN said it wasn't terrorism. I'm gonna go down and get that dude. What's Connie Chung,
now
yeah?
the Prime Minister and opposition leaders are
I'm
offering their
from way
thoughts and
back,
prayers through the tragedy.
With the country in mourning, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says all Canadians are here to support the loved ones of the victims. Hearts go out to everyone affected.
No, we're
Trudeau
not.
says in a statement he is saddened by the tragic loss of life and thanks the RCMP and first responders who put their lives on the line to protect us, including Constable Heidi Stevenson, who was killed in
They hid while she was getting shot.
The leaders of the Conservatives, Bloc, NDP, and Greens say this tragedy is
All they had to do was look for every RCMP officer. Look at all the ones you know and you recognize. Okay, it's not none of you. The one you don't recognize is the guy, stupid. That's how easy that was. You made it dead simple for you and you still fucked it up.
And computers have a negative impact on their children.
Limits may be needed in some cases, but
Anyway, I got a podcast to listen to.
says you
I'm gonna
have
listen
to
to it. You
consider
don't
the
have to.
context and who kids are interacting with.
And in fact, how it might actually be contributing to sustaining good cognitive stimulation, good social interaction, and not just say, here's the time limit, we're cutting it off at this point.
Saying you should ask, are they viewing or interacting with high quality content? Is there an educational or a social development aspect?
The only times maybe we need to be concerned about gaming and social media is if kids are being stressed additionally by that social media or by that gaming interaction.
Kids can't go outside to hang with friends. Schwartz says screens may be the best alternative for now. I'm Safe Kaiser.
Coming up in just 60 seconds, traffic and weather together on the ones. 680 News Time, 10:20.
I'm almost prepared.
Today's
Give me a second.
showstopper
I'm
at
almost
TSC
prepared.
is an exclusive bundle featuring the 9.7-inch Apple iPad, plus 3 years tech support and awesome accessories to work, play, learn, and create like never before. Today only, it's just $529.99 with 32 gigs of memory, or just $659.99 with 128 gigs of memory at $370 off, and with easy pay payments. Today is the day to get an Apple iPad from TSC.ca. Today's shopping choice.
Stop the spread. COVID-19 can be deadly. Everyone must do their part to stop the spread of COVID-19. Ignoring self-isolation or physical distancing advice can have devastating effects and endanger the lives of your family, your friends, and your neighbors. So do your part. Don't risk becoming a spreader. Stay home and save lives. For information, visit ontario.ca/coronavirus. Paid for by the Government of Ontario.
680 News Time, 10:21. It's time for traffic and weather together on the ones. Here's Barb Andrews. This report brought to you by Roto-Rooter Emergency Services. Construction on the eastbound 401 east of Dufferin in the express, 2 left lanes, and then through Brimley in the express again, 2 left lanes. Lots of construction on the westbound 401 this evening. Westbound 401 throughout.
This is this isn't. See if this is set right. Index. I'm not sure how long this is. I wasn't smart enough to look at that before I started this. I still got the key. I won't touch it because my fingers are wet. I still got the cafe drink. Oh, you can see half of my table, but not the whole
Welcome
table.
to Sputnik, still orbiting the world, even in the time of the coronavirus, with me, George Galloway. It's a slimmed down version, of course. Gayatri's at home on her maternity leave, but we are still going, and I hope still providing some glorious news,
That had to be a
insights
translation
into
thing.
the raging issues of the day. None more raging, of course, than the coronavirus pandemic. The last time I interviewed one of the leaders of Britain's Prison Officers Association, we more or less agreed that one of the most dangerous places to be in the country was in jail because of
Whether
the
you're a
rising
CO
levels of
or a
crime,
prisoner.
violence against officers, overcrowding, absolute inability to rehabilitate most prisoners because of the shortage of resources. and of course the poor pay
this little
and
bastard?
prospects
Oh, where
that
the
the
fuck he just came
members
from?
of
I've been
the
outside.
POA had to endure. Well, that was then. This is now. In the midst of the pandemic, what now for Britain's prisoners, their prison officers, and of course the families at home of Britain's prison officers? I'm joined by Mark Fairhurst, who is the national chairman of the Prison Officers Association, to discuss just that. Mark, welcome on board the Sputnik. Just tell us in your own words what it's like being a prison officer in the middle of a pandemic.
Well, it's extremely concerning at this moment in time, and our members are doing an absolutely commendable job on the front line, as is everybody working in our prisons to stop the spread and contain the spread. At the moment, as I'm sure you can imagine, we are experiencing more and more cases each and every day, and as it stands today, we have 218 prisoners who've got COVID-19 and 82 staff. We've got over 7,000 staff self-isolating at home. So in those confined spaces, we've put measures in place to halt the spread, and that includes severe regime restrictions.
Right, because locking people in little rooms with no air, that helps. That's how.
And now you're saying you've got 7,000 officers in isolation. That must be the very definition now of a skeleton staff.
Skeleton staff. What they're talking about is that instead of doing their jobs, the guards are all sitting together in little tiny rooms in their break rooms, not working. So all the prisoners are sitting locked down in little tiny cells. Who's maintaining the HVAC? Nobody. Nobody cares about that. You geniuses. You geniuses. Oh, the unions fought to get cigarette smoking taken out of the prisons. In Canada, home of tobacco, where it comes from. This is the first plant Creator gave us. This is our medicine, sacred. Okay? But there's no rule about providing air to prisoners. There's no rule that says they have to have air. You can seal them shut. You think I'm joking? Go to room 112 at 60 Queen Street West. Look up at the air vents. Every time I have a court case, they put plastic over the air vents and duct tape them. Every time I'm there for some other reason and I go check, that plastic's been removed. They know I have sickle cell. They know because I'm a ward of the fucking state that paid the health insurance for the blood tests that they're refusing to admit they've read. They throw the page in the garbage and go, oh, it's not on here.
Yeah, but fortunately, because of the contingencies we put in place, and because of those severe restrictions that we are adhering to, we've cut a lot of activities, including the social visits for prisoners. So because of the depleted staff levels and the regime we're running, we can actually cope, because we're going back 25 years when we had those restrictions in place anyway, because we had hardly any activities and workshop space. So at the moment, we can cope, and we're looking at probably about 15% of our workforce are off, but in some places, it's as high as 30-35% of staff are not on duty. So luckily enough at this moment, we can cope. But if it gets any more depleted and any more severe, we're looking at, realistically, only opening a cell door and feeding prisoners and giving them their medication and not allowing them out at all. That's how severe the restrictions could get.
The prisoners are on basically a double lockdown. The society is locked down everywhere, but the prisoners are locked down even within a lockdown. And that kind of frustration must produce...
No, you took the word lockdown from us.
For your members. A prisoner that's not getting association at the level, anything like what they had before, not able to access the workshop and education such as it is, and maybe even, as you describe it, having to be fed and medicated in their cells without coming out at all. That's a recipe for...
Oh, I didn't realize that's normal in Canada. I didn't know.
It is, and that's why it's such a commendable thing that we're doing at this moment in time.
You get to come out of yourself for food and medication.
They realise that this isn't a punitive measure, it's a necessary measure. But let's not forget, this is life or death.
There's great international interest, as you'll appreciate, in Belmarsh Prison, where Britain's most famous prisoner is currently housed, Julian Assange. Have you got any insight you can give us on what the situation is like inside Belmarsh?
Well, the situation in Belmarsh is pretty much like every other prison.
He had a love child in the Ecuadorian embassy. The movie's coming.
I would think that they are under the same guise as everybody else. So the most that the likes of Julian will be getting is exercise for about half an hour each day. He'll be getting out for a shower and he'll be able to access the phones.
One of the demands
they always say an hour a day, half hour a day. What they never tell you is there's like 100 guys getting an hour a day by themselves. It's 100 hours a day. You never break that down to make sense.
Is that happening with any prisoners? I mean, are people being released where it's possible to release them?
No.
They are, but it's a slow process because of the criteria that is being placed upon those prisoners getting that executive release. So you have to be within the last 8 weeks of your sentence, and you have to be classed as what's called low risk. So low risk of reoffending, no risk to the public, no sexual offence, no violent offenders are allowed out, and no terrorist-related offenders are allowed out.
We get out 8 weeks early.
I would class the likes of Julian as being low risk, but obviously it's very, very political. And I guess the government think there's a good chance of him fleeing or gaining asylum in another embassy, and that's probably why he's still inside.
Yeah, in his case, of course, he's unconvicted and is being held only because of an extradition process. On the subject of women,
you get a rape allegation against a child from one place, and your love child pops up in the other place. Like, neither story is true. I think they're both true.
Being eligible for some kind of release, and pregnant women prisoners also. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, that's actually happened. We've released 17 female prisoners. The majority of those were pregnant or had young children to care for.
Finally, and I'm grateful for your time, Mark, how would you describe the overarching situation, leaving out
the prostitution, shoplifting charge,
temporary
debit card fraud?
When I spoke to one of your colleagues last time on the show, it was low pay, poor manning levels, failure to retain because of the low pay,
and I still have a big chunk
and the lack of prestige that should be given to prison officers but isn't. The danger of working in a prison because of this frustration of the prison population.
It's a totally controlled environment. You are never safer than as a CEO in a jail.
Can be retrained because of all of the foregoing.
You get to tell the police, hey, give me your gun, and they have to do it. You're never safer than in a jail. Even the army ain't going to come in unless you ask them to.
Well, there's two things there. I think you've hit every point that I wish to make, that things will not improve because they were still the same before this crisis. We were still losing staff hand over fist. Over 50% of people who leave the job within the first 2 years, and we're losing ever more experienced
staff. They go in thinking they're going to do this, and they're going to do that, and they're going to change it.
Other sector bodies like the Border Force and the police, and indeed the NHS.
That's your commanding officers that run the game, stupid.
The retirement change is ridiculous. They expect us to work in the most hostile and violent workplace in Western Europe until we are 68. That needs to be addressed. And violence was on the increase. More concerningly, serious assaults against staff were on the increase. And I think overall, what this situation highlights is how essential we are as a frontline public sector service to society to keep people safe, to care for the most vulnerable and violent in society.
And
I would think it also highlights how depleted every public sector workforce is and the severe lack of investment from governments over the last 5 to 10 years. It highlights that we need to invest more. We need to respect public sector workers.
We want more money.
We want more money. Job that we do behind those big grey walls, so easily forgotten. So after this crisis,
easily forgotten. How much of a percentage of your population has been in jail for no good reason?
But they forget about shit.
Hey, remember the jails? Yeah, half my family in there right now.
At least shut up. To invest in our prisons to make them decent places to live and to work. And also,
you want them to be decent places to live and work.
Assaults on staff have reduced dramatically
Shouldn't
because
we try to
prisoners are
eliminate
spending more time
prisons?
behind their doors. Because they feel safer, they're not getting bullied, they're not getting threatened, and we can control them, which proves to me that in order to have a successful regime, you need adequate staff on duty. To have adequate staff on duty, you need a package in place that attracts the right people and retains the right people. And that's not going to happen without investment, a good career structure, and more importantly, a pay structure that recognises the risks that you're faced when you work in a prison.
That's the big lesson of this corona crisis, isn't it? That the people who are most important to our daily lives are often the least rewarded. And
prison guards are the most important to your daily life,
the least
really.
prestige.
The cop
Whereas those
arresting
who
the
are
guy ain't
most
important, but the
rewarded
prison guard is.
and the most prestigious are the most irrelevant when we are in a jam like this.
Yeah, certainly. Look at all those people keeping this country running at this moment in time.
The drug dealers,
invisible before this crisis.
the longshoremen,
Shop
the
workers,
baggage handlers, and all
transport
them
workers, cleaners, care workers, public sector workers. They were all forgotten about. And these were some of the lowest paid people in society. Care workers going out, they've got 15 minutes with each customer. You haven't even got any personal protective equipment vital to the running of this country. The girl on the cashier who takes your goods off you and takes your money from you. So important to keeping you fed and keeping this country running. We need to be a bit kinder to these people. Just say a thank you instead of moaning that they ran out of toilet rolls. You know, if nothing else, we should come out to this better people.
Oh,
and be
I have to talk to you, even though my face hurts, I have to talk to you. That's what started with the white girl. That's a grocery store here.
This is highlighted.
Oh, I don't care if you got the worst pain condition known to man. You have to go to the white girl cashier, not the China lady, not the black woman.
It's commendable the way
white girl.
everybody's doing.
Why? She keeps trying to tell me I have to talk to her, or she won't give me my change.
Very well.
I don't want to flirt with her. Oh, you have to.
Coming up after the break, it's the extraordinary figure of Malcolm X, and more importantly, the political philosophy that he represented. Don't miss it.
Oh, Malcolm X coming up. By any means necessary. Oh yeah, it's not me being racist and not want to be with this white girl. These people are telling me I have to. White girls don't count money without stealing. They can't count money and
one of the most
fucking touch it without trying to steal it. Never
Inspiring,
met one yet.
Enigmatic figures.
Didn't try to steal money off
history. Yet few understand
or successfully
exactly
stole money
what Malcolm X's political philosophy was, what it started out as, what it ended up as, and whether the transition between one or the other lays some trail towards discovering the reasons why he was cruelly murdered, assassinated in plain sight. Dr. Michael Sawyer is a professor in race, ethnicity, and migration studies at the Colorado College in the United States of America. He's just produced a book, the first book, I think, on the political philosophy of Malcolm X. It's called Black Minded, the political philosophy of Malcolm X, and I'm glad to say that Dr. Sawyer joins us now. Doctor, thank you for rising so early.
You run the whole operating system, software, server, everything in between, but you're not responsible for fucking my signal up, right? All I want to see is how much is left on this track. It takes 10 fucking minutes to find out. That's fucking hilarious.
At the Colorado College in the United States of America. He's just produced a book, the first book, I think, on the political philosophy of Malcolm X. It's called Black Minded, the political philosophy of Malcolm X, and I'm glad to say, Doctor, thank you for rising so early and coming on to the show. There's a lot of people in Britain, never mind in the United States, love Malcolm X, but don't quite know why, don't quite know what he stood for. In your research for this tremendous new book, what can you tell us about that?
I mean, I think that's right. And first, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the book and to join your show. I mean, I think your initial point is the correct one. Malcolm was a figure that was always in transition from the earliest moments. And much of this will come from, his kind of iconic autobiography with Alex Haley, right, where he kind of journeys from this legacy as a street hustler up to the moment when he gets assassinated, and there are many stops in between that. So what I was trying to do is to take a look at Malcolm X kind of holistically and try to determine if these transitions were predictable because of a background or underlying political philosophical position.
So he developed from primarily a black icon to an icon of the oppressed everywhere. Was he therefore a black icon, a socialist icon, or a Muslim icon?
He's kind of all of the above, right? And I think that's what you'll find from his political philosophy is he's grabbing what he needs from each of those kinds of persona, right? So to begin with the kind of middle term that you use, the socialist aspect of, he was interested in kind of economic justice. So elements of socialism, he would kind of harvest from what we understand as classical socialism in order to assemble a philosophical position. Then with respect to blackness or being black, that becomes his primary point of departure, which is, what I mentioned, how he assembles this notion of kind of a worldwide blackness or a worldwide notion of being agreed. And the final thing, the notion of Muslim, that's where when he journeys across the planet to go to the Hajj, it gives him a worldview that allows him to pull all of these things together and see how they can be productive for people outside of just the United States of America or even continental Africa, where he began to be concerned as well.
It's a remarkable transition or series of transitions over a comparatively short period of time. Give us some idea of how long he stayed in these individual positions, how long it took him to end up philosophically, politically, ideologically at the point he was when his life was cruelly cut short.
And you're right? It happens very rapidly. The kind of the best way to think about it, it's almost like an artist like Jimi Hendrix. By the time you get to see him in concert, what you thought you were going to hear has already altered itself, right? So when I came up with the title Black Minded, it's from a speech he gave, two speeches he gave, one in late summer of 1964 in July, and then in January of 1965. And he uses the term black minded to kind of encompass what he's thinking about. And so one person in the audience asks him what happened to the Back to Africa movement. He's already shifted from that at that point and starts talking about how people in the United States need to become black minded enough to understand what that actually means. And then he proposes that black minded is
my skin's dark, I'm black.
He begins to consider this kind of black nationalism.
I think the Jimi Hendrix.
It was that simple. My black bandana and jacket should make me black.
And I haven't heard that before. By the time people came to hear him, he'd already shifted from the positions that were the reasons why they came to hear him. Did he take people with him on this journey, or do you get the feeling that at the time, in his lifetime, he was quite isolated, really?
At the end of his life, he was clearly isolated. I think kind of the central argument of the book is that the way I see it, Malcolm X kind of took all of us with him. And even for me as a scholar who was studying something like Black political thought, I had excluded Malcolm X from that in many ways, right? Because I understood his biography. He was an iconic figure for me growing up. I worshiped Malcolm X in important kinds of ways, but didn't realize that almost everything I was thinking about Black political thought or radical political thought was really seen through the lens of Malcolm X's system of thinking.
Now, when Dr. King made a transition from activity more or less exclusively amongst Black Americans and dealing with civil rights issues to the issues of opposition to imperialist war in Vietnam, and perhaps even more to the economic issues of strikes and trade union activity and so on. That may have been the point at which the power then in the United States decided that he had become too dangerous and had to be neutralized with extreme prejudice. I kind of get the feeling from what you're saying that that may also have been true of Malcolm X. They could have handled an ex-hoodlum talking about back to Africa, talking about black separatism. But once it
like the black loyalists in Sierra
or the
Leone?
transition took place, and a much more universalist Malcolm X, challenging much more fundamentally the way things
We didn't
were.
walk away when we
that,
were
that was the
allowed
point
to.
that he
We
too
killed
had
Massa
to be
and left
neutralized.
because
What do
we
you
felt
think?
like it, and we
Malcolm X shifts from this
walked
question
away
of,
and run.
like you mentioned, like black separatism to something like a black kind of universalism, and the question of human rights, right? With this goal of holding the United States accountable to the world. So what he proposes to do is to create almost a transnational nationalism where diasporic black people, particularly in the United States, who he understood as not having really a country, could then ally themselves with other countries around the world to create a case to be taken before the United Nations to hold the United States responsible for their activities.
His first encounter or involvement with the religion of Islam was in its fairly exotic, non-orthodox form.
Which is what,
of
bro?
the Nation of Islam, which had quite a few elaborations, as a Muslim scholar might say, to be kind. At what point does he transition to, if you like, the more ordinarily assumed orthodox brand of Islam?
What are you talking about?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the Nation of Islam at that time clearly was not practicing what we would understand to be traditional Sunni Islam. And so the kind of breach with the Nation of Islam comes, and this is, part of his classic biography, with his concerns about the kind of moral culture with respect to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and then a disagreement about how to handle two events of police violence that then pushed Malcolm X out of the Nation of Islam and then have him seeking kind of an intellectual or spiritual home. He finds that in being invited to Africa, the Hajj, to go to Mecca, et cetera, where he then begins to see that what he had understood to be Islam was not expansive enough because it didn't include all humankind, right? So you can see how the kind of ability to go to the Hajj and see what he saw, black Muslims, what would be understood as white Muslims, et cetera, brown Muslims, yellow Muslims, Muslim or Islam across the spectrum of humanity. It then created the possibility for him to see a kind of worldwide movement rather than limiting what he's doing to the inner cities of the United States, where he was most prominently understood to be working.
You've picked a great time to release this book. There's a heightened interest in Malcolm X, and perhaps especially in what happened to him and at the hands of whom. Are you finding amongst your students and amongst potential readers of this book a hunger to know more about this man? You see, for many people, he's the tall, handsome figure pictured with Muhammad Ali. He's the man in the Theresa Hotel in Harlem in Spike Lee's film. Do you think it will go beyond, if you like, the superficial, the iconic? I mean, it helps that he was handsome. It helps that he was tall. But do people now, do you think, want to know what he really stood for?
I smacked my head off a ceiling.
I mean, I hope that's true, right? I think what you're mentioning is important, right? There's a way in which there's a preoccupation, I think justifiably so, with the documentary that just came out about the assassination of Malcolm X, right? That then begins to close the door or put a period on that part of his biographical story. But the question you asked earlier is the important one, right? Important one. What is it that caused this kind of extreme activity to have to take place, right?
You think we'll ever have a Malcolm X Day in America?
Malcolm X Boulevard.
I mean, I can see it. We have a Malcolm X stamp, right? Which would Malcolm X would have seen thought to be impossible and probably would have thought to be pretty funny at some level, right? So there's a way in which it's almost predictable that some time in the future will come around to having a day that celebrates Malcolm X's birth, which, his 95th birthday is May 19th, coming up pretty soon. And so there's a way in which I can see that happening.
I was once sat with the late President Fidel Castro having a conversation in the early hours of the morning when he stopped speaking, stopped in his tracks, because he had seen Bill Clinton come out to jog wearing a Malcolm X baseball cap. And he said to me, because he knew Malcolm, of course, and Malcolm facilitated his stay in Harlem with the Cuban delegation at the United Nations on their very first visit, when they'd been effectively driven out of their original hotel in Madison Avenue. And he turned to me and he said, if you had told me back then that one day the President of the United States would be out jogging in a Malcolm X baseball cap, I'd have thought you were completely insane. So don't give up, don't give up hope. I'll tell you as a postscript, after a very, very long description of Fidel Castro's time with Malcolm X, I asked him, so how do you evaluate Malcolm X as a world historic figure? And he thought for a moment and he said, Malcolm was a great man, but he was a little bit dangerous. And I remember thinking, if Fidel Castro thinks you're dangerous, right, you must have been dangerous indeed. Dr. Sawyer, absolutely, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Sputnik.
Thank you so much.
Alas, that means we've reached the end of the show. But you can still stay in touch with us through our social media